Good morning and welcome. It is 8:30. It is the 5th day of April 2021. I am your grumpy guide to all things gaming, the OGGM, and support. Give me a subscribe. Help me hit 400 subs. Okay, so we couldn't go 48 hours without another controversy hitting our beloved hobby of Dungeons & Dragons. This is not a new one. This is an old one. Over the weekend, a website, YouTube, whatever we want to, what are these things called? YouTube show channel called Extra Credits brought up once again the evil races, bioessentialism, world building BS in a desperate attempt to, I guess, attract attention to their site. Right now they are looking at 8.9k thumbs up and 26k thumbs down. 26k, just 26,000. 8,000 people said, yes, this is still a thing. 26,000 people said, no, it was never a thing. And if you look at most of the comments are, you don't know what you're talking about. So all this, of course, goes back to the whole evil races / racism / there's no such thing as evil races, or there shouldn't be. You know, orcs aren't evil, they're just misunderstood, and you can have good orcs, you know. Michael Myers from the Halloween films, he wasn't evil, he's just misunderstood. He just needed a hug, and if he'd gotten a little bit more love from his parents, he probably wouldn't have become the murdering shape we all know from. So, yeah, this argument has been going on for a while, and it was created a year or two ago by a small group of SJWs who have no experience with the game whatsoever, and it has fallen mostly on deaf ears within the gaming community, at least the people that matter in the gaming community. But there is a small percentage who are like, oh yeah, orcs are evil, and I'm tired of my drow elf being portrayed as evil. I want to be whatever I want to be. And of course, you know, that's just bullshit, because you can be whatever you want to be. But their take on this stupid argument is that evil races are bad game design, that a well-designed game would not have inherently evil or inherently good, or any form of biocentralism. We would all just be happy humans in cosplay costumes pretending to be orcs or dwarves or whatever, and basically everybody's the same and everybody gets along, and, you know, there's nobody inherently evil. Of course, by saying evil races are bad game design, what you're really saying is the idea of inherently evil races or individuals is bad storytelling. Bad storytelling. So if your story has an inherently evil race or an inherently evil individual, or an inherently good race or an inherently good individual, because they did also say that, you know, having inherently good races is bad storytelling, that everybody should just be whatever you want them to be, and there is no bad guys. So it's an example of bad game design. So any game ever, from the very beginning of our hobby and even pre-existing our hobby, miniature games, because, you know, the Nazis are usually the bad guys in the miniature games too, is bad game design, which means it's bad storytelling. And by saying that, you know, evil races or the idea of inherently evil is bad storytelling, basically they're saying any story ever that portrayed a race of individuals or a class of individuals or a species of individuals as evil is bad storytelling. So we're going back throughout history to the very beginning of storytelling, the very earliest form of known storytelling that we have discovered, cave paintings and pictographs, which from the very beginning of storytelling, there is good and evil. Because you can't have a story without conflict. And in order to have conflict in a story, there has to be a bad guy. If there's no bad guys, then there's nothing for the good guys to work against, which means there's no good guys. And if there's no good guys and there's no bad guys, there's no story. Storytelling from the very beginning of storytelling, going back to the very first quasi-intelligent, quasi-human individuals that we have found through archaeological discovery, had storytelling in some form. We're talking cave paintings now and, you know, the simple pictographs. And those portrayed, even back then, the idea that there was something outside our control that was responsible for the bad things, that there were evil forces working against us. And their premise is, well, that's bad storytelling. Any story ever that has any example of an inherently evil race or an inherently good race is bad storytelling. So I'm sorry, but every story ever is wrong, because bioessentialism is bad. The idea of races being anything in a world building is bad and racist and wrong and goes against the current SJW woke mentality, which is, of course, completely wrong about our hobby and is completely wrong about storytelling. You can't have the heroic journey without a hero, and you can't have a hero without an antagonist. Now, of course, all this goes back to the orcs are racist. Orcs are the racist stereotype bullshit. That someone, somewhere, got it in their mind that the orc race from D&D and every other game that uses orcs as their generic bad guys are a racist stereotype for... Well, see, that's where the argument starts to get a little weird, because they never actually say what it is they're a racial stereotype of. What is it that the orcs of Dungeons & Dragons and the other games are a racial stereotype of? Who are they supposedly making fun of or using as their example? Mongolians? Vikings? The Gaul? Africans? People from the Middle East? People from Spain? Asian people? Cavemen? Who is it that the orcs are supposed to be a racial stereotype of? The only real example in, if you're just going by the way the orcs supposedly look, and that changes from, interpretation to interpretation, short, squat, green-faced individual with tusks. Well, there's nobody in history that matches that. Maybe they're a racial stereotype of Mongolians, or I don't know. Africans, Madagascarans, Mesopotamians. I mean, yeah, that's where it falls flat, because they don't say, oh, orcs in D&D are actually a racial stereotype based upon the way colonial white people saw indigenous people. Who? Which indigenous people? Eskimos? Who? Who are the orcs a racial stereotype of? And of course, orcs come from Tolkien, and in J.R. Tolkien, they were not a representation of anything. The orcs in J.R. Tolkien were elves that had been captured and corrupted by the eye and the powers of Mordor to be a mockery to the elves and the Vanyar and the races of good. There were inherently good races that had been blessed by the Vanyar and Morgoth and Sauron in an attempt to mock this ability to create races and create life, took the most beautiful and inherently good thing they could find, elves, and corrupted them, drew them into the darkness, tortured them, and remade them into a race that was built to be conquerors and destroyers and the fighting arm of darkness. They wore evil for the sake of being evil. There was nothing redeemable about the orcs. And this was based upon J.R. Tolkien's experience with Nazis and fighting in the wars, and just seeing this happening to his, beloved country and across Europe, this march of racism and homophobia and destruction of anything that was different. And he related that to become the orcs, that here was a force that was marching across the country, destroying everything in its path, had no redeemable values. It was just evil for the sake of being evil, and was doing evil things in the name of evil. They were not a racial stereotype. There's no race in the real world that orcs were based upon. They were his interpretation of the good of the world being corrupted and destroyed and made a mockery by the evil of Nazi Germany. But orcs existed even before that, or the idea of evil spirits have always existed in storytelling. So he was also picking from Norse mythology, Greek mythology, European history, and the idea that there were evil fairy folks, evil elves. I mean, you go back to Norse mythology, Greek mythology, demons, evil spirits that worked that were the embodiment of the evil of the world and the evil of the cosmos, whose whole purpose was to corrupt and destroy the good of the world. Now, you take away inherently evil and you take away storytelling. So you need bad guys in your world because there has to be something for the good guys to march against. And speaking of selling out, support me. I will sell out. And I need a sponsor. Okay. So in closing, despite the, we've argued that the orc thing and where the idea of orcs in our game comes from, and that it is not a racial stereotype about anything, let's go one step forward. Let us, if you hold this new idea of the way the game needs to be played up, and you're basing this new social justice idea of the way D&D needs to be played and the way D&D needs to be perceived upon Critical Role. Because none of this existed before Critical Role. So let's face it, all these attacks against our hobby and the way our hobby has been perceived and the way the OSR, the OG players, and the way the game has been perceived up to the last couple of years, all that comes from Critical Role and this new SJW woke cancel culture of the hobby. Now, your blessed cult of Critical Role have played all evil games with all evil characters and all evil races multiple times. In fact, if you look at some of the stuff Matt Mercer has done outside of Critical Role, he is in a game where he plays an evil character and everybody else is playing evil characters and evil races. And as far as I know, the bad guys are still bad guys in Critical Role. Vecna has not had a sudden change of heart and it's just like, oh, I'm not evil. I'm just misunderstood. I just needed a hug from Jester, and now I'm okay. No, they're evil bad guys still exist in Critical Role. So obviously you're being hypocritical because if you're basing your perception of the way the game needs to be played based upon Critical Role, well, they have placed entire campaigns and stuff. I mean, remember Crit Miss where they all played evil goblins? No, they think so. Inherently evil in biocentralism or inherently good in biocentralism is an example of bad game design. No, it is not. Inherently evil or inherently good races in bioessentialism is an example of bad storytelling. No, it's not. And by making this statement extra credit, you're saying every story ever told is bad and wrong. And there should never be any idea of evil or portraying any race as inherently evil in storytelling. In fact, except, of course, the entire history of storytelling has that idea in it, that there is some evil force working against mankind. And you can't say, oh, well, the cavemen were racist against the other cavemen, because chances are a caveman probably never, most cavemen never saw other cavemen. They lived very reclusive lives. Their entire world was maybe a mile in every direction. The frontal cortex idea of something different being bad didn't even exist in our Cro-Magnon ancestors, because those concepts didn't evolve until we started evolving higher thinking, and higher thinking didn't evolve until much later. So the most primitive species that was capable of recording things, and we're talking on a cave wall, had bad guys in their stories. The idea of inherently evil individuals, inherently evil species, inherently evil races, inherently evil existing in stories as old as stories, as old as games, as old as the species. So your blanket statement that this is an example of bad storytelling is completely and utterly wrong. And if you believe that, then you should probably stop supporting any aspect of the hobby altogether, because all the hobby, going back to miniature games and whatever, as far back as this goes, the minute we started giving personas to things on the gaming field, even chess, black and white, there are bad guys. So you're ridiculous and you're stupid and you don't know what you're talking about. And really, if I want to have orcs remain the bad guys in my game, well, it's my game and they're going to be bad guys because that's just what it was. And if I don't want the orcs to be bad guys anymore, but progressive industrialists who are trying to change the world for better, whatever. But you need bad guys. Imagine Star Wars without the Empire or Vader. This Palpatine guy, he's not really evil. He's just misunderstood. Really, he needs a hug and a sandwich, and he'll probably stop this. Imagine World War II without the Nazis. Oh, well, these guys, they're not really bad. Sure, they're burning books and persecuting Jews and blacks and gypsies and homosexuals and pretty much anybody. But you know what? They're not evil. They just need a hug and a sandwich, and it'll be fine. We just don't understand them because there's no inherent evil. And orcs, though, they're not inherently evil. They were made to make fun of. Well, see, that's it. You still don't tell us who it is you think orcs are making fun of, because they're not making fun of anybody. So please, just stop. Just shut the fuck up. You don't know what you're talking about. You're basing an entire incorrect movement on the perception of a small group of people who never played the game and just got to bun up their butt to say, oh, this is bad. Or you're not letting me play my character the way I want to play it, so you're a racist, you're a sexist, you're fat shaming me. And that's just wrong, and it needs to stop. And finally, extra credit again, if you truly believe that this is an example of bad storytelling, then you probably need to stop being a part of the hobby that you so despise, because storytelling's not going to change. And there's always going to be bad guys. And if you don't agree with me, you can get the fuck off my lawn.